Hello, I'm Derek Walker. I'm the pastor of the Oxford Bible Church, and this week we're going to continue our study of one of the most important and dramatic events of the Bible, the destruction by God of Sodom and Gomorrah, as recorded in Genesis 19, verse 24 and 25. These sinful cities, God finally decided he was going to use them as an example that he does judge. It says, "Then the Lord rained down upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire," which is literally burning sulfur balls. "He rained them down from the Lord out of the heavens. And so he overthrew the cities and all the plain and all the people of the cities and whatever grew on the ground." So this is a devastating judgment of the whole area. And specifically, he targeted the cities. And there were 5 cities all in all. Sodom was the largest city because it was always mentioned first in the lists. So God specifically rained sulfur balls down on the cities. Well, we saw that the New Testament confirms that God judged Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed them, and that he did it as an example and a warning to all mankind that he is a God and he will judge by fire. Well, 2 Peter 2:6 says this. It says, "Turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes. God condemned them, he judged them with an overthrow, making an ensample for those who afterwards should live ungodly." And this means he made a visual exhibit of these cities, that he is a God who will judge. Peter tells us these cities were so completely destroyed that they were turned into ashes, and that, that the remains of these cities were preserved. That's the implication, at least. They were preserved as a visual reminder and testimony to all people that God will surely judge the wicked. Jude 7 also talks about this. It says, "Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in like manner," that's 3 other cities as well, "giving themselves over to fornication," sexual immorality. They didn't just sin in that respect, they gave themselves completely over to that sin. "And going after strange flesh. They are set forth for the purpose of being an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." And so it's a picture, this judgment was a picture of the eternal judgment of eternal fire that God will judge. And God wants man to know that he will judge. His patience will not always last. There is a time coming when God will judge with fire. The first century Jewish historian Josephus says he confirmed that these cities could still be seen in his time. That's the time of Christ. He says, "Now this country of the Dead Sea is so badly burnt up," he says, "that nobody cares to come to it. It was of old a most happy land. It was a very fruitful, beautiful land, both for the fruits it bore and the riches of its cities. It was the place to be. But when God judged it, it turned it into an area of terrible devastation." So Josephus is saying the Dead Sea area used to be the most happy land, although it be now, he says, all burnt up. A cataclysmic disaster had overtaken that place. And then Josephus goes on to say it is related how for the impiety or the sin of its inhabitants it was burnt by lightning, in consequence of which there are still the remainders of that divine fire. And the traces or the shadows of the 5 cities are still to be seen. He says you can still see these ashen cities. They're like shadow cities. They can be seen where those once proud cities were. And so that was in the time of Christ. Perhaps these cities can be seen today. If they survived 2,000 years to the time of Christ, perhaps they even survive to our time today. I want to show you the evidence that, in fact, they have survived and we know where they are. Well, the remains of these ashen cities by the Dead Sea still do exist today, and they testify to the truth of God's word and the certainty of his coming judgment by fire. The rains of the brimstone balls, the sulfur balls that rain down from heaven 4,000 years ago, turning the cities into ash, are embedded throughout these formations, ready to be discovered by any explorer today. Members of our last tour group found at least 70 balls. Let us now look into the background of Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities played an important part in the life of Abraham. Let's go now to Genesis 13, verse 1 to 4. Then Abraham went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, to the south. Abraham was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. You see, when Abraham returned from Egypt in the south of Israel, he traveled north as far as the region of Bethel. Now, Bethel means house of God. Today, Bethel's near Jerusalem, but originally, and certainly one Jewish tradition says that it was actually a reference to Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount in the beginning. And so Bethel, you see, means house of God. So anyway, Bethel is certainly at or near Jerusalem, and he traveled as far north as the region of Bethel. And then it says he settled on the hills between Bethel, between Jerusalem and Ai, somewhere there in the Judean wilderness. Now, Ai was the city that Joshua conquered immediately after Jericho. Jericho, of course, being near the River Jordan. So Abraham, therefore, pitched his tents east of Jerusalem on the hills that descend from Jerusalem down to the Jordan Valley. And as we'll see from this passage, this location gives a wonderful view to the Jordan Valley below. Well, let's read on, shall we, in Genesis 13, verse 5. Lot also, who went with Abraham, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them both, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they couldn't dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then also dwelt in the land. So everyone wanted the land. There wasn't enough to go around. So Abraham said to Lot, "Please, let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we're brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, then I'll go to the left." And so with Abraham was Lot, his nephew. At this time, they made the decision that they should split up because the land would not accommodate all their herds, apart from the native inhabitants of the region. So Abraham, the senior partner really, was very gracious to ask Lot what land he wanted. He gave Lot the first choice. Whereas as the senior one, he could have insisted on his own choice. Well, in our last trip to Israel, we visited Genesis land, which is designed to give groups a feeling for what life would have been like for Abraham, living a nomadic life in a tent in the wilderness. We approached Abraham's tent on the Rolls Royce of ancient times, the camel. Each camel is worth a few £1,000s. One of our bonuses of visiting Genesis land was the discovery that this was the very location where Abraham and Lot and their flocks were living together in Genesis 13 when they decided to separate. And so the views that we had at Genesis land that I want to show you a bit later were actually the views that Abraham and Lot had down into the Jordan Valley. As weary travelers approaching Abraham's tent, we were hoping and expecting to be refreshed by some of his famous hospitality. Genesis 13:10 says, "And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go toward Zoar." Notice that from these hills they could see the Jordan plain below. As Lot looked down, he saw the fertile Jordan plain, which was like the Garden of Eden, all the way down from where they were looking to Zoar at the southern end of what is now the Dead Sea. However, the view of the Dead Sea is blocked by its mountains. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and devastated the whole region around them, creating the Dead Sea in the process, the whole Jordan plain was like a beautiful, well-watered garden, even where the Dead Sea is now. What a beautiful view it would have been to Abraham and to Lot. And no wonder Lot was tempted to take the land of the Jordan Valley. Little did he know that soon it would be destroyed by God because of the sinfulness of the inhabitants. High on the hilltop, Lot looked and he saw the Jordan Valley. Because of the mountains, only the northern end of the valley could be seen, certainly not as far south as Sodom or Gomorrah. One author in the late 1800s checked this out for himself, and this is what he said. And this is written by Henry Harper of the Palestinian Exploration Society in the Bible and Modern Discoveries. He says, "What can there be seen is the northern end of the Dead Sea, the Jordan Valley, and the river running like a blue thread through the green plain. The hills of En-Gedi shut out completely all view of the southern end of the sea. But, as I before said, the northern end, where the Jordan runs in, is about 2 or 3 miles of that sea can be seen, of the northern end. I've wandered all over the Bethel Hills," he says, "and tested this question." So in Genesis chapter 13, let's go back there, in verse 11, it says, "Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other." Lot really should have given Abraham the first choice, but he took Abraham at his word, and he claimed what he thought was the best ground. Lot saw the northern end of the area now occupied by the Dead Sea. When he traveled east from where he was, down the hills, into the valley, this is where he initially went, to the north end of the Dead Sea. Genesis 13:12 tells us what happens next. "Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain." Notice that expression. We'll see it again. These cities that were destroyed are called the cities of the plain. And it says that Lot pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain of Jordan. And this is the summary, really, of the whole area in which Lot then lived. And this was the area of the 5 cities of the plain. Well, this plain of Jordan covered a large area, since the northern region is what initially caught Lot's eye. He would first have come down from the hills to Zeboim in the northern end. Then it describes Lot dwelling in the cities of the plain, and then pitching his tent towards Sodom, which is generally accepted to be at the southern end of the Dead Sea. In fact, there's a salt mountain there called Mount Sodom today. It's the biggest salt mountain in the world. In other words, Lot headed south from the northern end of the Dead Sea. He headed south in the direction of Sodom. The Bible reveals that there were 5 such cities of the plain that Lot would have visited in order. Zeboim, then Admah, Gomorrah, Sodom, and then the southernmost one was Zoar. This map shows their locations based on 5 regions of ashen remains with sulfur bores that have been discovered near the Dead Sea. We will see that these locations also agree with all the other clues given in the Bible. Lot stayed in these cities as he gradually traveled down to Sodom, the largest of these cities, always mentioned first in any listing, Sodom and then Gomorrah. And we know that Lot finally took up residence in Sodom. But Genesis 13:13 ominously adds, "But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord." Here was the warning of coming judgment. Well, Lot had many animals. That's why he had to separate from Abraham. So as he journeyed towards the plain and through the plain, he had to travel slowly, taking his flocks with him. Wherever he stopped along the way, he needed to have enough pasture land for his animals. And the sites, the ashen remains that can be found, locate those 5 cities. And that agrees, you see, because they're all several miles apart. And there would have been plenty of land between them for his pasturing. When he finally settled in Sodom, he needed more pasture land for his flocks. So there was pasture land near the city. Now, then Genesis 14 tells us a very interesting story that sheds further light. It tells the story of an invasion of the area that took place when Lot was living in Sodom. Genesis 14, verse 1 and 2. And these were very rich cities, and that's why the invaders wanted a piece of the action. Genesis 14, verse 1 and 2, it says, "It came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, and Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom," there's the first one, "Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeba, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela," that is Zoar. And there you have the 5 cities of the plain, 5 kings under attack. These were exactly the 5 cities that were destroyed. Well, they're all mentioned together. And then in verse 3, it says, "All these kings joined together in the valley of Siddim." That is the Salt Sea. Now, here we're told that the region that later became the Salt Sea, it actually became that Salt Sea that was created in the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. But in this region was originally a valley. The Dead Sea did not always exist. It was originally a valley called the Valley of Siddim. Later it became the famous Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. And it was in this valley, it says, that all the kings joined together in battle. If the Dead Sea was there, that would be silly, wouldn't it? You don't fight a battle in the middle of the Dead Sea. But it used to be a valley. And it says that they went down into the valley to fight the battle. And the invaders won this battle. And for 12 years, the kings, the 5 kings, were submitted to these invading kings. Then it says in the 13th year, they rebelled. And they went out to battle in the valley. It's interesting there that the first mention of the number 13 in the Bible is connected with rebellion. That tells you something about the meaning of 13. 12 is governmental perfection. You know, you have all the things in the New Jerusalem, the 12 apostles, and you have all the 12s, which denote perfect order under God's authority. But add one to the 12, the 13, you have the number for rebellion. So they rebelled in the 13th year, and again they went out to battle in the valley. Genesis 14:8 says, "The king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and of Bela," that is Zoar, went out. They went out of their cities, and they joined together in battle in the valley of Siddim. So they came out of their cities. Remember, they're called the cities of the plain. Not the cities of the valley. They're the cities of the plain above and around the valley. They went out of the cities and they went down into the plain, which is where the Dead Sea is right now. What happened? Verse 10 tells us. "Now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits." That's tar pits or bitumen pits. "And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and some fell there." And what happened is, in the panic and the fleeing, many were trapped and fell into those pits. And the remainder fled to the mountains of Jordan. You see, At this time, the Jordan River would have flowed all the way down to the Gulf of Aqaba through this valley. The entire area was lush and beautiful. And the kings chose to fight in this valley, but they lost. Now notice the cities were said to be in the plain, not the valley. They're called the cities of the plain. The kings went out of their cities and down into the valley to fight their battles. This proves that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are not now under the Dead Sea. They were not covered by the waters of the Dead Sea, but they were on the plain surrounding the Dead Sea, just where we find their ashen remains today. According to Genesis 14:10, at this time there was no Dead Sea, but there was a valley where the Dead Sea now is, and that it was full of tar pits. It oozed bitumen. Now, this was very expensive stuff. It's interesting that Josephus says that the Dead Sea was formed as a result of the devastation that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And it was called Lake Sodom. And Josephus and the Greeks also called it Lake Asphaltis because it had a lot of asphalt. It had naturally surfacing asphalt or bitumen. In modern times even, asphalt is occasionally found floating in the southern part of the Dead Sea, although there was obviously much more discharge in the past. Josephus affirms that the sea in many places sends up black masses of asphalt having the form and size of oxen. The abundant supply of bitumen in the valley sheds light on other scriptures as well, because Sodom, it's generally known, isn't it, for its widespread homosexuality, but the Bible's description of the sin is far wider. Ezekiel 16:49 and 50 says this, "Behold, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom, pride. Fullness of bread and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. They were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away, as I saw good." Here we see the root of their sinfulness was pride, based on their great wealth, causing them to be idle and disregard the less fortunate. They were full of haughtiness, thinking of themselves better than others. Why were they so wealthy? The tar pits give the clue. Bitumen was a highly valuable commodity in those days, being used all over the ancient world for building purposes, for waterproofing and so on. And in the Ebla tablets discovered in Syria, one tablet shows the highest price for anything was the bitumen. And these people just had to go out and get it from their front door. That's why they had so much wealth. And the invading kings wanted to get some of that wealth for themselves. And the Ebla tablets also name all 5 of these cities. Well, Genesis 14 says, verse 11, "They took away all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions, and they went their way. And they also took Lot captive, Abraham's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed." And in response, in the story, Abraham goes out, defeats those kings, and rescues Lot and all the stuff that was taken. So where are the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah today? They were called the cities of the plain because they were on the plain adjacent to the valley of Siddim, through which the Jordan flowed. When God judged these cities, he made the whole area a scene of cataclysmic judgment. He sunk that valley so that while the waters of the Jordan flowed into it, no waters flowed out. The waters just collected together and formed a large lake, the Dead Sea. God flooded the whole area as well with salt so that nothing could live there. It became the saltiest place on earth. Mount Sodom, the largest salt mountain in the world. The waters, therefore, were saturated with salt, so it became the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea, because no fish or anything could live in such salty waters. And then finally God machine-gunned the cities themselves with balls of burning sulfur, which turned the cities into ash. And now, no, they are not called the cities of the valley, but the cities of the plain. They were not in the valley that later became the Dead Sea. Therefore, they're not under the waters of the Dead Sea, but they're on the plain adjacent to the shore, between the sea and the mountains. So to locate the cities, we should search the region looking for any remains consisting of ash-like material with sulfur balls embedded in them. This might seem too much to hope for, but there are good grounds from the Bible to believe that those cities have been preserved by God. And 5 areas have indeed been found near the Dead Sea, consisting of white ash material that have sulfur balls embedded within them. These 5 regions must correspond to the 5 cities of the plain. And the best preserved of these cities is Gomorrah underneath Masada. Despite 4,000 years of erosion, it still displays shapes of Canaanite-style double city walls, city buildings, ziggurats, and sphinxes. God surely has judged Sodom and Gomorrah. It's a warning that God will judge this world. Get right with God before it's too late. I believe the Lord has told me to write books to get the Word of God into your heart. And one of my new books is called The Sabbath Issue. This will be a real study. It's £10. Then there's my book, my most popular book on end-time prophecy. The foundations of the subject is £8. And also Joshua's Jericho, with lots of pictures on how the story of Jericho in the Bible is confirmed by the archaeology. You'll find this fascinating. And also, this series that I'm teaching on Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be in a book that's available shortly. You can order it now. And all these books are available if you call 01865 515 086 or visit our website, oxfordbiblechurch.co.uk, or send a cheque to 363 Banbury Road, Oxford, OX2 7PL. Make the cheque for Derek Walker, and you'll be blessed.
This broadcast was brought to you from the Oxford Bible Church. We meet every Sunday at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. You are most welcome to join us. For further information concerning our church services and our other teaching materials, please visit our website at www.oxfordbiblechurch.co.uk or call us on 01865 515 086.
Hello, I'm Derek Walker. I'm the pastor of the Oxford Bible Church, and this week we're going to continue our study of one of the most dramatic events of the Bible, the destruction by God of Sodom and Gomorrah, as recorded in Genesis chapter 19. Verse 24 and 25 says, "The Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire, burning sulfur balls from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew the cities and all the plain where they were, and all the people of the cities and whatever grew on the ground." Total destruction of that whole area and those cities in particular. New Testament confirms that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah as an example and a warning for all mankind. In other words, he would judge all mankind by fire. All the wicked will be judged by fire, as he did with Sodom and Gomorrah as an example. And so it's a picture of the coming future judgment, the eternal judgment actually, that is by fire. Jude 7 agrees. It says, Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example to others, to us, suffering the vengeance, the judgment of eternal fire. 2 Peter 2:6 says, God turned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes. condemned them with an overthrow, making an example for those who afterwards should live ungodly. In other words, it's a warning to everyone. If they're going to turn away from God and live ungodly, there is a coming judgment of fire. Peter actually tells us here that these cities were so completely destroyed by fire that they are turned into ashes, and that God gave them as a visible example for all. In other words, the remains were preserved by God as a visual reminder that God will surely judge the wicked. And the first century Josephus, amazingly, confirmed this, saying that there are still the remainders of that divine fire, and the traces or shadows of the 5 cities are still to be seen. He says, round the Dead Sea, there are 5 places where you can see the remains of these cities, and that they are like shadow cities. The traces of those cities are still there to be seen, turned to ash. What an amazing claim that is. Presumably he knew that anyone could go and check that out. Well, that was 2,000 years ago. I wonder if they're still to be seen today. These 5 regions alongside the Dead Sea can be identified in satellite photos, since the white ash material that they're made of stands out clearly against the brown of the natural rock of the region. Well, let us go now to Israel. We took a tour group there recently, and we went to one of these places, the site of Gomorrah, and we explored there. And I want you to join us and come with us now to Gomorrah in Israel.
We are in Gomorrah, and 2 Peter 2:6 in the New Testament says that God turned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly. And here we're standing in Gomorrah, and God turned this place to destruction. He turned it to ashes, and you can see these thin layers. This is ash, and if you touch it, it will crumble in your hands. But because it's compacted ash, it's actually denser than the original material. That's why it's held together these last 4,000 years. Josephus says that in his day, that's the time of Christ, that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were still to be seen as shadow cities. And that's how we see it today. Yes, of course, they've been eroded tremendously for over 4,000 years, but you can still see shapes of buildings throughout. And what was caused it, he said he destroyed it with fire and brimstone. Brimstone is sulfur. And you will find in the city sulfur balls, yellow sulfur balls, that God rained down. And because sulfur burns at such a high temperature, it's turned the actual buildings into ashes. And many of the sulfur balls are actually encased in a material, because when the sulfur ball got surrounded by molten material which hardened, that cut off the supply of oxygen, and so they can be a perfect specimen is a sulfur